You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast. I'm your host, Richard Spanners Ready. This show is being recorded on Tuesday, April 26th for our normal Sunday spot, because we're all going to be feeling rather delicate after the Missed Apex karting on Saturday. On the following Tuesday, we're going to experiment with a mailbag episode, so get your comments and questions in at feedback@missedapex.net, and Matt and I will answer your questions. This week, we're going to go back into the past and explore another classic teammate battle. This time, it's Fernando Alonso versus Lewis Hamilton back in 2007. And we're going to explore the bubbling pot of excitement that is F1 in Miami. But first, Matt and I catch up with the greatest ever F1 statistician, Sean Kelly. Sean Kelly, the virtual stat man. We do appreciate your time. So welcome to the shed, Sean, the greatest living F1 statistician.
If you say so, man, I'll happily take that. I think there are many more worthy names for that, but yeah, still somehow getting away with this and haven't been arrested. So good luck.
You did name one pre-show that you felt was an even greater F1 statistician than you.
Well, easily, Jacques Deschenaux, who compiles the Grand Prix guide. It used to be called the Marlboro Grand Prix guide for years. The little red book that everybody had that was the must thing, pre-internet to find F1 data and stuff. And so Deschenaux was the man who created Formula One statistics and looked after them and so forth. And I was once introduced as like the TV version of that guy. So I'll take that, because everyone in Formula One knows Deschenaux as being the guy when it comes to written data. And obscure facts, somebody asked me for obscure non-F1 facts. Okay. He was the presenter of the 1989 Eurovision Song Contest when Switzerland were the host after Celine Dion won in 88. How a Formula One statistician ended up hosting the Eurovision Song Contest, I don't know, but I'm looking forward to doing it. If anyone at RTE is listening in Ireland, next time Ireland win Eurovision, I'm available. Talk to my agent.
Okay. That's not the direction I expected it to go, Matt.
I was going to say, well, that's why I heard of him. Eurovision, of course.
Of course.
So what was the name again? Jacques
Deschenaux.
Okay. Yep. Right now, if you ask most F1 fans to name an F1 statistician, you're being very modest, but they will, if they know any, it will be Sean Kelly. So stop being modest and answer Lorna's question from our patron Slack group. You talked about the data and looking through Jack's encyclopedia of F1 stats. Lorna has asked, is it all publicly available data that you provide to F1 broadcasters, or do you have secret sources of data?
It is largely publicly available, Lorna. Thanks for the question, by the way. You can subscribe, if you subscribe to Autosport's database, forex.com, you can find a huge amount of data, raw data from that website on its own. And, you don't need any trickery to do that. And then I put a little bit of, fairy dust on it in terms of I have my own database as well, but it's not using data that has been supplied to me by teams secretly or anything like that. No. It's all stuff that's in the public domain. And, using that Thomas Edison quote, it's, 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration. It is absolutely that case that it is just a lot of hard work and study that arrives at these single sentence sound bites that we can use in a broadcast.
Yeah, like anyone can read a book in the library, but you have to know where to go and when to go to that place.
Right. Yeah. Half of the job is not just knowing it, but also in terms of being able to file it somewhere that it can easily be found when we know we need it. Like, okay, we need something on Q3 right now. Okay, let's go to the Q3 directory here. Okay, here's everything we need to know about this Q3 session. Boom, we can just throw that out on the air right now. You want something about Verstappen? Okay, let's go to the Verstappen directory. Okay, yes, put that in. Verstappen and Leclerc. Okay, yeah, we've got a Verstappen Leclerc stat, roll that in, and so on.
So a lot of it then is just knowing where to look. One of our other listeners, Sam Labine, asked, how does he work with all the data? Is it just Excel? Is it all up in your head? So give us a little portrait of how you might answer a question like that in real time.
Normally, very rarely am I actually asked questions by the broadcasters live. It does happen, but generally speaking, they let me get on with stuff, and they rely on me to roll this stuff in when I think it's going to be relevant. I guess that's half of the job, is being able to trust me to know if something interesting happens. Sean will give us this piece of information, and we'll know to say it, because I've told them, I could give you 100 pages of data, but what use is it? We just give us 2 lines. We just need to know that bit. We don't need the rest of it, Sean. Very exciting. I'm sure you're very, very excited about it. We don't care. Sometimes they will ask me stuff, and often it cracks open this whole new realm of research where I think, I hadn't thought of that. Let me go and have a look at it. And then I'll come up with the answer, and then there'll be a by the way on the end, which is, oh, by the way, you may not know this, but blah, 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 blah. So, that can work that way as well. But generally speaking, when we arrive on the air, most of what we're going to do in a broadcast has been mapped out already. And then there are races, obviously, like Hungary last year, when there's a bowling ball that goes through the entire front of the grid, and we've got a completely different race to what we'd anticipated.
Yeah.
So when that happens, that's actually the most fun for me, because then suddenly it's like, okay, what do you really know off the top of your head? Do you know all this stuff? Boom, 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 boom. Or when like Perez got pole in Jeddah. Oh, Mexican driver on pole for the first time in history, 61 years after Ricardo Rodriguez was on the front row. Perez, longest F1 career before taking a pole. Like, you got to have that, boom, straight on the air. So that tests your preparedness.
A little bit about your job then, because the thought that just came to my mind there was FP1, FP2, FP3 must be you must be a very useful resource to people during those kind of sessions where they go a bit test match special. The old cricket commentary with 5-day English test matches where they go, yes, and nothing's happened for quite some time, and the number 67 bus is circling here at Headingley. So a little bit of background on the job. You are actually a resource for a lot of different broadcasters for statistics. It's not like you're just working for Sky or F1 TV.
Correct. Yeah, I actually work for 16 domestic broadcasters.
Wow. Okay.
And also for F1 themselves. There's the international feed, the world feed as we know it. There's the domestic broadcasters. Sometimes the teams will ask me for some stuff on the side as well. There's a lot going on a given weekend. There's certainly, I have to wear a lot of hats, put it this way.
You must be the richest man in the world.
Well, if statistics actually paid anything, then yeah, I would be. I would say that if the reason I've been able to make a career out of it is because so many people come to me that I'm able to get away with it. But it's I wouldn't say that I haven't ordered the Gulfstream just yet.
Not yet.
I'm holding off on that one just yet. I'm just going to go with the Cessna.
I'm imagining your tax return must be a bit of a nightmare then, with 16 different income sources at a minimum.
Yeah, and there's also 4 different currencies as well. Actually, 5 currencies. I mean, I get paid pounds, US dollar, euros, Swiss francs, and Australian. So there's I just shove it all to my account and say, you just tell me how much it is at the end. I don't care. I don't want all this paperwork. I'm paying you. You just tell me and I'll sign it and send the check.
I'm glad
sometimes be late for my taxes because I haven't got any money.
I'm glad we've gone down this route, because the new Missed Apex policy is to dig deep into everyone's tax affairs. That's right. Mainly what we do here at Missed Apex Podcast. Now, we did get some great questions from our patrons, but Matt, I know you wanted to grill Sean a little bit about some new regulation stats.
Yeah, well, I was just curious because I saw a couple of weeks ago someone on the internet going, "Oh, field spread is still bad. Look at last season qualifying cutoff times." And I thought to myself, that doesn't seem like a great comparison in a new regulatory era to compare to the last season of an old regulatory era. So I was just curious to get your impression or your understanding of, how is the field spread? Like 2009 is the last era I can think of that had sort of this big of an aero change. How does it compare? And how does it compare across history? Have they really tightened it up in the way that they intended to?
I'm not sure that these regulations, the spread isn't as gigantic as it would have been in previous era of reg changes. But that's not because of reg changes, not technical reg changes. It's more to do with sporting reg changes, because where we can trace the history of the sport as starting to get really close together was the introduction of the 107% rule in 1996. Before that, you could have cars like the 40s.
Yeah.
That's F-O-R-T-I, not F-O-R-T-Y, not the number 40, but the cars, the 40s. They would qualify up to 10 seconds off the pace, and they'd be in because there was only 26 entrants and there were 26 cars on the grid. So they knew that they were in no matter what happened. So they could come up with a car that was 10 seconds off the pace and still get a place. For 1996 onwards, that was not the case, and it would start to be did not qualify. That forced teams to actually spend money and consciously make cars that were up to scratch. From then on in, the field started to close in on each other. So now we've got grids that are closer than ever before. I mean, we've had many Q1s in recent times where the spread between fastest in Q1 and elimination can be a second, 1.2 seconds, which is incredible. I think back to Imola 1988, an often quoted weekend in statistical history.
Is it?
Where it is, and I'll tell you the reason why. The two McLarens, Senna and Prost, on the front row of the grid at Imola in 88. Senna was in pole position. Third place was Nelson Piquet's Lotus, the world champion, in a team that had won a race the previous year, third on the grid, same engine, 3.3 seconds behind. He was third on the grid. That would get laughed at now. 3.3 seconds, you're miles off. That's Williams. Williams would beat you now. But in 88, it was like, good job, second row of the grid. That's encouraging. So it's important to keep things in context and say, look, perhaps it seems like, we need to make the cars closer together. They are close together. Yeah. This is as close as they have ever been in Formula One. And that's why now we can get races like Esteban Ocon winning in an Alpine when there's a bowling ball that takes out half the grid. Whereas back in the day, like from 85, I think, through to 96, like literally 4 teams won races for a decade. Actually, from 87 to 96, after Senna's last win in the Lotus. Up until Panis winning for Ligier in 96. It was just Benetton, Williams, McLaren and Ferrari.
That was Panis, though, at Monaco, when the five cars finished.
And there was only 3 cars running at the line. So that was a crazy race. But even then, as I mentioned, after introduction of 107%, before then, the dichotomy was such that, even an injured McLaren or Williams would be easily quicker than the back of the grid car like a Coloni or an AGS. So it was just not going to happen. But now it is possible for a midfield team to win a race just, because of a fortunate safety car or something like that.
So, Sean, this is great because I think you're the same age as me, 41. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I vaguely remember things. Like I'll remember a snippet of commentary. I've got a feeling you can tell me exactly what race this was. I remember Murray Walker saying, Michael Schumacher, there was a messed up pit stop or something, and they said he's gonna need 15 qualifying laps to win this race, and it was dubbed as like this miracle that he did. But he was winning other races that season by 47 laps or so. So that's how big the field spread used to be. You had cars that could if they wanted to lap the field over and over and over.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly theoretically possible. I mean, Schumacher won the first race in '94 by a lap, because Senna spun off. But Senna was the only other guy who was going to be on the lead lap. And at the second race that year, Schumacher nearly won by a full lap. Berger was second in the second race of '94, and he was on the lead lap. So Schumacher could have lapped the field in consecutive races. So, I mean, that would never happen now. Nowadays, the fact that Verstappen lapped Hamilton at Imola, it was headline news. It was like, oh my God, what?
All right, Sean, too soon. Jesus. Matt.
Yeah. But...
Well, I'm loving the historical context you're providing here because, often people who watch Formula One for a long time say that, these youngsters today, they don't know how good they have it. And from your description, they really do have it pretty good. Yeah. If you think about the old days. I want to ask about a related statistic. I mean, we've seen, and because you were talking about Schumacher, we've seen Hamilton tie his record for drivers' championships, but not go on to beat it. How often has it happened in history? Yet. And that's the question. Have we seen someone tie it not beat it the next year, but then go on to beat it later on? I don't know the answer.
Well, in the case of Hamilton and Schumacher, of course, we're in uncharted territory because they are all-time records. And when Schumacher beat Fangio's record of 5, he surpassed the record in the season after he equaled it, 2002, 2003. So it would be unusual. It would have been unusual last year if Hamilton had won the title last year, as it seemed likely he was going to until that last safety car.
Too soon.
He would have been the oldest champion, I think, since Alain Prost in '93, and he can still be that this year. And then if he waits another couple of years, he's getting into the realm of the oldest 5 champions ever, which I think is...
it is one of our patron questions. Can I do the question so that Rob Andrew gets some credit here?
Certainly.
Rob Andrews asks, who are the 5 oldest drivers to win a world championship? And based on that, does he think Lewis is likely to win an 8th? And this is a recent tweet from a discussion between me and Alex Van Gien when we were thinking about the ages of champions. And actually, Lewis Hamilton, having won at 37, is already right up there in old drivers. You have to go back to 2004 to have Schumacher winning at age
35.
Age 35. So already Lewis is a little bit of an oddity, along with Michael Schumacher, 2 phenomenons of the sport. So his question again, who are the 5 oldest drivers to win a world championship? I guess we're going back to 1986 for that, are we?
No, not that far. I mean, one of them is Nigel Mansell, and Nigel Mansell won it when he was 39, I believe, in '92.
That's quite
Alain Prost was 38 in '93. That was an oddity. Yeah, they were very old. They were absolutely
You don't think of it.
No, I mean, you wouldn't think of them as being that old, but they were genuinely, in F1 statistical terms, out of place compared to the rest of F1 history. Because that year, think about the fact that Mansell won the title aged 39 in 1992, in the same year that Schumacher, aged 23, was winning his first Grand Prix. So it was like the point where we sort of ushered out the late 30s and ushered in the early 20s. There was a paradigm shift after that. To answer the question, Fangio was 46, I believe, when he won his last title in 57. Farina was like 44. I can't remember his exact age when he won the inaugural title in 1950. Jack Brabham was 40 years old when he won in 1966. Graham Hill, he was, what would he have been in 1968? He would have been 38, something like that.
Your brain just worked that out on the spot.
Yes, because I think he was 46 when he died in 1975, so should have been around about that. And then Mansell, as I mentioned, in 92 was 39 when he won the title.
Spring chicken. Jeez.
Absolutely. But so for Lewis to win this championship, to win any championship from here on, especially as being not the champion, not the reigning champion, officially at least, even though some people won't hear of it, for him to win it back at this stage, I think will be one of the all-time great sporting stories. It's going to be Tiger Woods winning the Masters after everything he went through in, when was it, 2019, I think it was. It's going to be that kind of story. And I've said on Twitter, if Hamilton wins this title back, especially in the circumstances of how he lost it, it's Muhammad Ali beating Foreman in the Rumble in the Jungle. It's winning the title back when you thought he couldn't, when you thought he was done and over the hill.
Now, I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan, and to me, his physical fitness and his commitment to the sport seems extraordinary, and he could be one of those annoying people that go on forever. But for an athlete at 37, you are already going into an irreversible decline. That is just biology. It would be something special to pick up a title now in this era, obviously not the Fangio type era. I think it would be, and not only that, he would have to do it against an up and coming star in the form of George Russell, who everyone fancies. What's that, Matt?
That's 3. You got Leclerc, Verstappen, and now you're talking about Russell. I mean, there's competition.
It's in my mind, as a Hamilton fan, I feel like we've had the glory days, and that's great, and we should appreciate it. I think it's beyond putting that. You're not going to put your mortgage on him winning another title now. The circumstances just don't quite seem to be aligning.
Well, yes. I mean, based on what you've seen at the start of the season, you would say, okay, the odds have lengthened considerably. But how many times have we seen him come back from, you know, a rocky start. Being, you know, 2017, 2018, 2018 especially, he was quite a long way behind Vettel at one point in the championship, came back to win it comfortably. So it's wrong to rule Lewis out. And
Yes, of course.
the thing is only one driver in the last 52 years has won a Grand Prix over the age of 40. 40 is the absolute cutoff.
That's good stuff.
That stat that I regurgitate from time to time, Nigel Mansell at Adelaide in 94, age 41, the only race won by an over 40 driver since 1970. So that's the big cutoff point. Alonso was on the podium in Qatar last year, age 40. That was only a second podium over the age of 40 for any driver in the last 35 years. So it's not impossible. And the fact is that drivers are fitter than ever. They look after themselves better. And Hamilton is, you know, the ultimate professional. I know people think he gets distracted hanging out with, you know, the Kardashians or whatever he's doing, but it's nonsense, because the fact is he couldn't win all these championships if he wasn't totally focused on what he was doing. He couldn't just show up and just roll around the track and win a title, because Bottas would have kicked his ass. And Bottas it was the other way around. Hamilton would show up. You know, Bottas might take pole, then come race day, Hamilton would be winning by 25 seconds. That doesn't happen just because he's good. It happens because of the commitment as well. Mm-hmm. So Hamilton can still do this, and if he does, as I said, it won't just rewrite the history books, but it will cement his legacy as a driver, because people will always say, well, he just had the best car. Well, there was a period where, okay, he went into having a crap car after all these titles, and he could have just said, threw his hand up, said, I've had enough. Yep. And instead, if he comes back to win, it's like, wow, what a guy.
It does feel like a medium-sized if at this point. Just a quick stat question then. I know Matt's got a Patreon question next. I think Hamilton, since 2015, has deprioritized qualifying. Is there a stat on the most wins from not on pole?
There is. I'd be lying to you if I said I remember it off the top of my head, because Hamilton owns and wins for most wins from pole and most wins not from pole. Okay. In 2021, he had already got a record. I forget the exact number, but I remember saying it in one of our broadcasts, or, you know, to Crofty and so on. He has the most wins from below pole position of any driver in a single season. So, you know, it wasn't a case that Hamilton had to be on pole to win races. You know, he was, as you say, there is evidence to suggest he might have not prioritized pole position as much, because Bottas was quite close to him in Q3 many times. But in the race, very seldomly. Be a different set of affairs in the race completely.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of interested because Mike Stoner has asked, are there any stats from the early days of Formula One that today's teams and drivers will never beat? And I got to say, Fangio at 46 might kind of be one of them. But are there any others that we should maybe know about?
Well, I can start with one that is within reach. The longest standing record, like performance record, which is most Grand Slams by a driver. Jim Clark has had that record since 1965. He has 8 Grand Slams.
What's a Grand Slam, Sean?
A Grand Slam is a win from pole with the fastest lap and leading from start to finish. So it's the perfect race, basically. It's exactly what Max Verstappen had this weekend and what Charles Leclerc had in Australia, which, side note, the first time in history that has happened where 2 different constructors have done it in consecutive races. With that in mind, Hamilton, I believe, has 6 Grand Slams off the top of my head. So he's too short of that record. So you think even Hamilton has not got to that record yet. But that record has stood for more than half a century and is still in place today. Other records, I mean, age records, as Matt mentioned, oldest point scorer, Louis Chiron, Monaco 1955. I mean, he was like 55 years old when he finished 6th in that race, I think. So age record, the old end of the market. Luigi Fagioli winning France 51. Those are records. That's a shared drive though with Fangio. Those records are probably not going to be moved. There's other ones like I think it was a 54 British Grand Prix when 7 drivers shared the fastest lap. So when you go to Formula One record books, you look at Mercedes and Ferrari, and Ferrari's points have 0.27 after them, and Mercedes have 0.14 after them. It's because they split the fastest lap 7 ways at that race. So they had to divide that 1 bonus point. So you've got these really weird numbers in the history books that have never changed in more than in nearly 60 years because of that. So there's some weird stuff from the first season of the World Championship. Maybe other stuff like most cars on the front row. There used to be 4 cars starting on the front row at the Nürburgring. Little things like that. So there's a few anomalies along the way.
This is fascinating. The Grand Slam pole.
Yep.
Starting on and then lead every lap and fastest lap. That's the Grand Slam, right?
Yep.
But didn't Verstappen also win the sprint race?
Yes, he did.
Does that? Do we need a new word?
So we're moving into the realm of perhaps creating a new category, which is somebody on my Twitter said, "Is it a super Grand Slam because he won the sprint?" And there is, and obviously as we are moving to that format here, there's merit to that because Verstappen got 8 points for winning that sprint qualifying race, whatever you want to call it. So he didn't lead all the laps in the race, it could be. It's close to a perfect weekend. He won all the points. It was a perfect weekend from the perspective of he got all the points that were available. So we'll see. We'll see how that develops. So what term. What we find to be interesting. It depends what the public think.
Sean, we're going to need one because the way it's going, I think there's some kind of sprint weekend Saturday race is going to become standard. I think they are married to this. They're all in. But in the next couple of years, we'll have that as just a staple. So we will need some kind of term for completing the super scraping the barrel cash in slam, the money slam, the cash
trifecta.
Now the funny thing is about this sprint format is that I have to say, I never met anybody who said, you know what we should do on Saturday? We should have a race on Saturday. I never met a single F1 fan who ever said that to me.
Exactly.
But when it was introduced, I have to admit, I begrudgingly did think, well,
we'll get used to it.
It does make Friday interesting, doesn't it? And also, it's pretty exciting on Saturday to have them going around the racetrack, especially if you've paid for a ticket. So there is that to it. The thing that I really, really annoys me is the redefinition of what pole position is.
Oh, God.
Because
yes,
that will scar the record books.
All right, Sean, let's do this because I don't know whether we're going to fall out or not. But how many times in F1 lore, in F1 canon, have we heard the term "the pole sitter is such and such"? You're the pole sitter because you sit on pole. So if you earn the right to start first in the race, you are the pole position stat. Not if you won the pre-qualifying for the sprint race. Surely, Sean.
Correct. Yeah. The origin of the phrase comes from horse racing, which is the fastest qualifying horse would start closest to the pole that was next to the start line, aka pole position. That's how that term came into being. A lot of racing terms derive from horse racing because, of course, that predates the invention of the motor car. So pole position, the driver that's on is the driver who is starting first on the starting grid. It doesn't matter the format of the session that determined that. So a lot of people have said to me, look, you're completely wrong. It should be the driver who was quickest in qualifying. No further discussion.
Idiots.
And I'll say, well, what about the 1950 Monaco Grand Prix when the first 2 rows were decided in the Thursday practice session and then the rest of the grid was decided on Saturday afternoon? Or what about the 1959 German Grand Prix when Cliff Allison was quickest in qualifying, but because he was a reserve driver, he was not allowed to start from pole position. He had to start from the back and therefore was not credited from pole position. Or the 1969 British Grand Prix where Jackie Stewart set pole position with a spare car, which was an ineligible lap time, and therefore that is not pole position. Jochen Rindt gets the pole position. There are countless examples of drivers being quickest in qualifying but not being on pole position. And also, a more recent example, in the era, the late 2000s, when Q3 was run on race fuel. Remember that? They used to choose their race fuel for Q3. Yeah. A great example, Jarno Trulli was on pole position for that notorious Indianapolis 05 race, the 6-car Grand Prix. The reason Jarno Trulli was on pole in that race was because Toyota already realized they were not going to start that race. None of the Michelin runners were going to be in that race. So what Toyota did was they drained the tank, put 3 laps of fuel in it and said, go out and take pole position. We'll have the plaudits for pole position. We're not racing. It doesn't matter anyway. He took pole position. Now, how can you say, when we had years of qualifying on race fuel, oh, well, that's the ultimate determinant of who is quickest over one lap? It was not. That was not the ultimate determinant. There were drivers that were quicker in Q2 who did not get on pole position, but that didn't determine who was awarded pole position. The pole position was given to the driver in first place on the official starting grid. There was no other definition thereof. And by changing that, we therefore open up this whole can of worms now, whereby Verstappen, we kicked the can down the road because Verstappen was on pole on Friday and on pole on Saturday.
Lucky.
So that was lucky. But we could have a situation now where Ferrari could lock out the front row, but Verstappen would be on pole. And, there's Verstappen. What if, some driver comes along who's all-time youngest driver on pole position, but he's starting 15th? You're going to have to explain that to your race day audience, and it's going to be just maddening.
Okay, so just to clarify that slightly, because basically Trulli had pole, first position was his, but the Michelin starters did not start that race because it was deemed unsafe for them to start that race. So all the Michelin-tired teams pulled out. The rest of the grid that were on the Bridgestones lined up in the positions that they qualified in. They didn't shuffle forward. Right. So just going to clarify that. So,
Yes, a further point to that, which is that did not start, if a driver does not start the race when he was officially in pole position on the starting grid, he still is credited with pole position. An example, Charles Leclerc, Monaco 2021. Leclerc did not start the race. He is still credited as being on pole position, even though he didn't start. It says on the starting grid, he was in first place, he gets pole position. Another example, Didier Pironi, when he crashed, had that big crash, career-ending crash, Hockenheim 1982. Pironi had pole position for that race. Ferrari did not withdraw that entry. Yeah. So on race day, if you watch the footage of that, and I'm sure you can, there are many video sharing websites available, you will see an empty spot at pole position. Pironi was the pole sitter for that race, even though he was actually sitting in hospital, laying in hospital, having surgery. Officially, he was pole position for that race.
Well, my advice to you is don't hold it all in, man. You have a clear opinion about this, don't you?
That was amazing.
It's not even an opinion. It's just stating a fact. It's not. This is not in my opinion. It should be this. No. 72 years of the World Championship tells me that this is what it is, and by changing it, you run the risk of confusing people and making it nonsense in a way that it isn't right now. Like everyone can understand. Okay. Who was in first place? Who started from first place? That guy's on pole. Schumacher at Monaco 2012. Fastest in Q3 is not credited with pole position. Go there to race day, he's not on pole position. Okay, we get it. He's not on pole. That's end of discussion.
Okay, well, we only have time for one more. And since we talked so much, I know, well, this just means Sean, maybe you'll come back sooner.
Exactly. You've got a home in the shed, Sean.
You see what? This is the thing. See, once you get me on this stuff, there's no stopping me. You've got to say, slow down, Sean.
All right. So this is kind of a doubleheader for which I'm famous, but it comes to us from Stephen F. this time, so technically not my fault. First one is, what's the most obscure non-F1 stat you know? And the second one is, do you know how many times your stats have actually been used by Sky?
I have no idea how many times they've been used. I would say that typically in any given broadcast, I will see my stats on the graphics, on the Sky graphics, on the F1 TV graphics. I will hear them spoken by Crofty and company. And I can always tell when they're quoting me directly because they'll say it exactly the way I gave it to them. So I can always tell, like, oh, that's exactly what I told them to say, basically. So, I mean, that happens dozens of times in any broadcast. That's normal. As for a most obscure, well, there's a whole Jacques Deschenaux presenting Eurovision in 1989 sort of thing. Most obscure. Little known fact about me, I started in 1987 when I started watching F1, I started watching, and I'm not making this up, sumo wrestling, which was on Channel 4 in the UK at the same time. That started.
I'm liking this already. Go ahead.
Channel 4 in 1987. And I became as much of a sumo aficionado as I was a Formula One aficionado. So I knew my Chonofuji from my Hoktumi and my Kanishiki, and I knew my Yurikiri from my Oshidashi. And even to this day, I still sort of keep tabs on what's going on in the world of sumo. And I know, shout out to Hakuo, who is the greatest of all time, who's just recently retired after 14 years as a Yokozuna with something like 43 tournament wins, which is something like 12 more than any other wrestler in history. So greatest of all time. And a Mongolian. Strange thing is, here's fun non-F1 fact, it's been 30 years since two Japanese Yokozuna fought each other, because all the Yokozuna in sumo have been from Mongolia or Samoa or Hawaii.
That long? I mean,
30 years. Yeah.
Of course,
Time flies.
I knew that trend. I just didn't realize it had been so long.
You would think sumo wrestlers, they'd be all be Japanese, but the last time two grand champions of sumo fought each other, both from Japan, was 1991. And it was in London at the Royal Albert Hall. Hokutomi and Asahi Fuji fought each other in a demonstration event in London in 1991. That is the last time two Japanese yokozuna fought each other.
I feel like this is actually a trait of 40-somethings Brits, because I am similarly weirdly obsessed with the Indian sport of kabaddi.
Kabaddi, another
yes.
Channel 4.
Another Channel 4 special. And like me and my friends, we used to recreate and play kabaddi in the playground. But Sean Kelly, this has been an incredible stat attack. You always have a seat in the Missed Apex podcast shed. Where can people follow you online so that they can find out where those stats are really coming from?
Find me on Twitter and Instagram at Virtual Statman, where you can see how much I love Lewis and how much I hate Lewis, depending on what it is I just said about him.
Oh my goodness, yeah, you are both biased towards Lewis and towards Max Verstappen, and you also hate them both.
I do. I very, very pro Verstappen, and also I hate Max Verstappen as well. Yes.
Excellent. Well, a universal love and hate. That's Sean Kelly to a T, and if we can avoid Liverpool matches, we'll get you back in the shed as soon as we can.
Thank you very much indeed.
While we recover from the stat attack of Sean Kelly, we can relax and we can set our mind to glorious beaches, to lifting some weights and sculpting our guns on the sunny shores of Miami, which is going to be the next Grand Prix, so we can all be muscle-bound and ready for the glamour of the 47th US Grand Prix of the season. And who better to take us through the Miami Grand Prix sights and sounds than Marcus Greaves from RACEWKND magazine. Magnus, thanks so much for joining us in the shed.
Thanks for inviting me, guys.
You are the entrepreneur and author behind RACEWKND magazine. Remind our listeners what that is. So many of our listeners actually subscribed to your RACEWKND magazine around Christmas. I think a lot of people said it made a fantastic Christmas present. Remind us what it is.
So RACEWKND magazine, our whole thing is to explore the circuits, the cities, the culture of Formula One. So other people do all the stats and race reporting. Yes. We choose a big theme about Formula One each issue and go and dive in. It's a extra large, supersized magazine, tons of photos, but also we dive in and cover a story. So whether it's Formula One in the 1970s or Jet Set Formula One or the new one that's coming out, which is Formula One in the USA, we take a big topic and we explore it in different ways.
And just to be clear, not a paid promotion. We're internet F1 friends. Although you did force me to take a cut of the subscriptions that Missed Apex listeners took out.
I did shove money in your pocket. I forced you to take it. Sure.
For which I'm grateful to the listeners and yourself, Magnus. That obviously helped us out a great deal. But if you don't mind, I'd like to just pick your brains about Miami, because you guys are going down there to take part in one of the million fan fests around the city. What I think some people are really underestimating is how big a deal this is to Miamians, Miamites.
What I experienced, so we went down there a few weeks ago. We were actually partners with the Miami Grand Prix to create the official guide to the RACEWKND. So we went down there to capture all the content. So what happens in the city and then where that overlaps with motorsports and the sort of car scene over there. I've been to a lot of cities before a Grand Prix, but never have I experienced anything like this where every single person was very excited when we told them what we were doing. Usually we say Formula One, they'll say, you mean NASCAR? We're like, no, we mean Formula One. And it's this awkward discussion. But there, everybody was so excited about it. Everybody was so aware of it. And they would turn around and say to me, hey, did you know Formula One, the Grand Prix is bigger than the Super Bowl, and we have it for 10 years. And I think that was one thing that Miami did really well, was to let people know this is a big event and it's a 10-year event, which allows whether it's businesses to invest financially to get behind it or the fans sort of emotionally and take pride in it. So the level of awareness there was phenomenal. The thing that really blows me away is oftentimes when you go to a race, as soon as you leave the circuit, things tend to sort of the spirit of Formula One, the festival of it disappears. With Miami, I've found so far 4 independently produced fan festivals that are happening throughout the weekend. You'd be lucky in a Grand Prix destination to have one that runs alongside. Miami has 4. And so we're setting ourselves up at one of them, the one in Wynwood, but we're also, trying to be active in the other 3 as well. But that just shows you how much people understand and are excited about what's happening in Miami.
Hey, Magnus, it's Trumpets. I have to ask, like, you've been to races, like you've been to Monaco, you've been to Singapore, right?
I've been to both of those.
And I'm just getting the feeling from the sidelines that is Miami going to be like in that league in terms of like the glitz and the glamour and the celebrity that we're going to be seeing?
Yeah, I absolutely. Because Miami on its own is a very, very glamorous, exciting place to be. And it's really kind of had its moment, through the pandemic and, all the people that have moved there and all the new things that have arisen. But in a place like Monaco's fantastic, so long as you're one of the sort of few people there that has enough money to actually stay in Monaco and, people to get onto a boat. But for most of the rest of the people, you're taking a train or something to get there. You're leaving as soon as you can, and you're not really participating in that glamour. Miami is different because not only is it sort of, more people can kind of come, but there's, with the fan fest and just with the overall party nature of the city, there are so many themed events, so many F1 related events going on. So I think it's more accessible. That sort of level of glamour is more accessible. Singapore, I think, is an amazing race because it's also a night race and you're in the middle of the city. So as soon as you're done with the race, you sort of, roll out and you're in a club and a bar. And I think Miami, the circuit is a little bit out of where, like South Beach and the party areas. But as soon as the race is over, there are so many places around the city that you can go and get stuck into the action. And also what I'm noticing beyond the Fan Fest is that more teams and sponsors are doing activations around the city that fans can actually be a part of. I mean, oftentimes they do very private events that nobody else can get into unless they have a VIP invite. But in Miami, there seems to be so many teams and sponsors doing things that other people can join. So it's going to be crazy.
You mentioned, the glamour there of other venues, and Miami doesn't seem to be shy in saying we're trying to emulate that. We've seen the things that are successful elsewhere, and we want to match that and then improve it to the point that they've got a fake marina in I guess not anywhere near a coast at all. It's a football stadium, isn't it? But they've got like a fake pool with like yachts and stuff.
They do, but it's it's all in the name of fun and putting on the best possible show that they can. You have 80,000 tickets, and you have over 300,000 people, I believe it was, that applied for those tickets. So there is huge demand there. Miami puts on amazing world-class events like Art Basel and everything. The expectation of a great party and a great venue is at its highest in a place like Miami. So it's not enough to do what the other races are doing. They have to go to a whole other level. And I think they've really achieved that. The amount, it's funny. Sometimes you see these celebrities at races and you think, oh, well, I think Formula One probably paid or helped get that person or recruited that person to come. In Miami is very different. And the number of celebrities and glamorous people, whatever you want to call them, that are coming, I think is at a whole other level. And they've had to build special things at the circuit to accommodate them. And I think what's also cool now is, I think before it was, they're trying to get celebrities out just to kind of get a little bit of that shine. But now these are people that are actually Formula One fans themselves in their own right. So I think it's going to be quite a cool atmosphere up there.
Okay. So, I mean, you said that this issue is about F1 in the US. What is Miami telling us about the future of Formula One in the US?
I think Miami's going to raise the game in terms of what the people's expectation is for coming to a circuit and having an overall race weekend. Like I was saying, sometimes you go to a race, it's great at the circuit, but then it falls apart. Miami's worked really closely with the city and a lot of the venues around there to make sure it really is this sort of festival atmosphere. You remember Liberty when they came in and bought F1, they said, we're going to make every weekend a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Well, they did nothing to make that happen, right? That said, Miami itself has actually hosted a Super Bowl. So they know that you get 80,000 people to the game, but you get 500,000 people that come to town to go to parties and to sort of, get that experience in a different way. And so, I think this is the first race where that Super Bowl feel for, which is what they're after, is really going to be felt. I mean, you get that in a place like Montreal, but they've sort of been doing that for years. I think Miami, the efforts that they're going to, and then the efforts that all the people around the city are going to, is going to set a whole new standard. So I think a lot of circuits are going to look at themselves and think, damn, we got to up our game here.
Well, I mean, Circuit of the Americas sort of gained attention by firstly, of course, doing the driver parade thing where they went in the red corner, Fernando Alonso, and then also having like Taylor Swift doing a concert at the track and really kind of combining the whole motorsport and entertainment into a festival. And with these four fan fests dotted around, it really does look like they're creating a festival of Formula One. Do you think, because that's not very British at all, none of that, nothing you've said is very British or European.
No.
Do you think that's going to spread and like the US way it's basically going to have to be, look, if you want to be part of the F1 circus now, this is the template you have to follow?
Well, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's going to be fans' expectations for paying a lot of money to come to a race and that full, complete experience that they want to have throughout a race weekend. So I think the fans are going to dictate that. I think that the sponsors that spend a heck of a lot of money on Formula One, and to be honest with you, they're invisible during most Grand Prix in terms of interaction. I think that they're going to get such a great return on investment, and not just financially, but in terms of engaging with fans, that they're going to demand this level of activity, going forward, right? I think
good point.
The number of extra fans that are going to come out of this is going to dictate how things go, from this point onwards.
So a sponsor might say, "Oh, I've got the choice between Zandvoort and Miami. Well, if I go to Miami, I know I'm involved for 5 days. I'm at all these events. If I go to Zandvoort, really, I'm only getting publicity on a Sunday. So, I'll just choose Miami." And then it becomes an arms race.
Right. And then whether it's Zandvoort or Silverstone or whoever, they're going to decide, look, let's go back to actually what you were saying about Austin. So I love Austin. I always have a great time there. They put so much into what happens at the circuit. You're hardly going to find a better circuit experience there. But they don't do much in the city, right? And so it's all good and well to keep adding things at the circuit, but if most of your weekend, your nights are spent in the city itself, you're going to have a great time in Austin because it's just a cool place to go out. But once you see that in a place like Miami, you can actually go to an F1 themed party, or McLaren is putting on this whole speed shop concept, or there's 4 different fan fests. And I think part of that needs to be initiated from Formula One, or at least they need to get out of the way. I think part of it comes from the sort of the teams and the sponsors. But what's super cool about Miami is that you have a lot of independent event companies, clubs, restaurants. They know what it means when Art Basel comes to town. Yeah. So they recognize, hey, let's do that again and more now that we have this great international spectacle of Formula One.
So, I mean, we're very lucky now in the United States. We've got 3 races coming up.
17 races.
And it's going to be, I think, 5 in a year. Have we reached that magical, the U.S. audience is now captured point from a business point of view? Do you see the U.S. suddenly finally being that market that Formula One has long sought?
Well, absolutely. But I also think that people don't realize that the American audience has been huge to Formula One for several years, right? If you've looked at where the online traffic comes to F1.com and to social media and everything, for a long time, the United States has been, the number one sort of market. now that you have 3 races, especially if they're going to go to this level of entertainment and involvement, now from my perspective, there's enough happening just in the United States to have a thriving F1 related company, which, 2 years ago, that certainly wasn't the case. I'd go to a race and people thought it was nuts that I was actually based out of North America. Now those same sort of European companies and partners are looking at me like, wow, that's a strategic advantage to work with you because you're in the middle of the biggest market in Formula One. So it's amazing how quickly those things change. And I promise you, you will see new things launch in Miami and shortly after as well that reflect the fact that there is an actual US, like a thriving US market. So you're going to see
you're
new media entities and new businesses.
You're making me want to book tickets, Magnus.
I told you for months to book tickets. That's on you.
Well, the thing is, with Miami, there was just no way. Like, if you didn't get into that first wave, you weren't getting there. But now I'm turning my attention to COTA, and I like a little blackjack. So Las Vegas next year sounds good too.
Listen, COTA is going to be really great. It's great every year at the circuit, but I'm already, a lot of the fan fests and the companies that I'm working with in Miami, they're already saying we've got to replicate this in Austin, even though they're not Texas companies, right? So I think it's going to be everything going forward. I'm already seeing the influence that Miami is having. But again, I think you're missing out by not being in Miami, even if you're not at the track the whole time. Just what's going to happen around the city and the number of fans that are going to be there, I think it's, I'm
in a blue shed in a rainy Bedfordshire. You do not need to tell me that I'm missing out by not being in Miami. Thank you so much for your time here. It is nice to get your insight, especially on American stuff, but also just the fact that you really do promote F1 races as a venue, as a destination, as a thing to go to. And that's what Race Weekend magazine goes to. I like you guys. I like your magazine. You send me a copy, which helps me want to promote it, but it makes us look posh in our house. It's a big like A3.
Yeah, it's huge.
And there's so many great pictures in it. I don't even have to do a lot of reading. I've not read a book since Netflix got good. So on your coffee table, on your piano, Race Weekend magazine does make your house of an F1 fan look amazing. You've done a great job with that. Can you explain in terms that even Matt Trumpets could understand how I go on the internet and how buying your magazine works?
So we do all of our subscription sales online at theraceweknd.com. What's super exciting about Miami, again, sorry, I keep going back to it, but we're actually setting up one of the fan fests. It's called Racing Fan Fest in Wynwood. So for the first time, we're actually selling magazines and subscriptions live, so people can actually flip through it before they make the purchase. And we're launching this week our new issue, which is F1 in the USA, which is nicely timed in terms of a theme with Miami. And I think what a lot of fans, especially the new fans, don't realize is the long, deep history of Formula One racing in the United States, whether it's the 11 venues that have now hosted a US Grand Prix, whether it's all the American drivers that have actually participated, or the US brands and sponsors. So, we got a few times. We actually have Daniel Ricciardo on the cover, and he sat for an interview with us.
Oh, nice.
To talk about why he loves the USA so much. So, we had a lot of fun with this issue.
Did you interview Daniel Ricciardo?
I was scheduled to, but I was actually on the flight to Miami, and the wonderful Elizabeth Blackstock, she did the interview, and she did a great job. I
have a theory that Daniel Ricciardo is secretly evil, and it switches. Like, as soon as the cameras come on and the interviews come on, he goes from like kicking in intern to being, Uncle Danny, your best mate. That's my theory, and I'm sticking to it. Evil Ricciardo.
I've only ever seen him smiling, so
yeah, that's what he wants you to think. Marcus Greaves, Race Weekend magazine. Links in the show notes below. Enjoy Miami, you git. I hate you.
I certainly will.
And have a fantastic time. Thanks for your time, Magnus, and good luck with the future.
Thanks, guys.
I made it sound like a job interview where you were getting rejected, didn't I? Good luck in all your future endeavors. Yeah, we're not hiring him. Magnus, thank you for your time. Well, from the glamour of Miami, we go to Jersey to catch up with Jeff O'Boyle. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Spanners. Glamorous as ever in Jersey. It's a wonderful metropolis of high culture and sophistication.
Oh, I'll bet. Yeah, and not paying any tax.
We pay a little bit of tax. We always pay the appropriate rate of tax, I think is what we say.
Nice of you to chip in. So, last time you were on the show, in fact, the last 2 times you've been on the show, it was to give us a rundown of historic teammate battles. Been very interesting to look back into the past. It was Sebastian Vettel and Mark Webber on the last one. It generated a lot of emails, maybe 100 comments and emails, because you made a mistake, Jeff.
Yeah, dare I make a mistake? I do apologise on behalf of all the massive Stewart fans who got in touch to confirm that Red Bull used to be Stewart and not Minardi, which of course became Toro Rosso. I do apologise to everyone involved in Stewart Racing, and I'll be printing a full retraction in any publication they care to mention.
So it was Toro Rosso was Minardi.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'd like to disassociate ourselves from Jeff's comments, but these things happen. It was a really good breakdown of the teammate battle, and we got into the spirit of it, and we're always going to misspeak and get the odd thing wrong. So I thought we'd make it a game of what did Jeff get wrong? Email us at feedback@missedapex.net and tell us what Jeff gets wrong in this episode as we dive into 2007, one of the most eventful and talked about teammate battles in F1 history, probably. I don't think that's an exaggeration.
Yeah, it was an absolute banger in terms of controversy. It's if you think Leclerc and Vettel's season, where Vettel was the established number one, and then Leclerc came in, was fast, and he had to bind wheels a couple of times, was controversial. You ain't seen nothing compared to this. You might have younger viewers who aren't quite familiar with exactly what happened, so we'll run down some of the key races maybe and how the thing evolved. But there's politics involved in it. There's a fine. There's all sorts of nonsense. There's a championship lead that was seemingly untouchable and then became touchable. So it had everything really. It had real spice, a proper bitter battle.
I think maybe we set the scene though and talk about where these two drivers were when they came into this, because Fernando Alonso was the double world champion. He was the cock of the walk.
He was the established number one, reigning world championship, made the move to McLaren expecting a decade of dominance to follow. And who would bet against him? Because you've got this young hot shoe Hamilton, who he did well in GP2. He was very good. He had some extraordinary drives there. Insert Turkey here. That's probably the wrong one. So there's your first clue that I might have made a mistake. But he was reigning GP2 champion. But so was Jolyon Palmer. He was a lot was expected of Hamilton, but I don't think people expected him to be quite as hot as he was.
It's interesting that not all GP2 or F2. Not all second-tier seasons are made equally. So Jolyon Palmer, of course, he had like 4 cracks, didn't he, at that second tier? And then the season he won, maybe not the strongest season, but, you've still got to go and collect and deliver. I think Hamilton's was a more straightforward, more promising rise up. So I don't think anyone would be surprised that he turned out to be good.
Yeah, I think he was expected to, once he got up to speed, keep Alonso honest, I suppose, and be a good benchmark for him. But I don't think they expected what happened at the first corner, where Hamilton proved himself to be no respecter of reputations and was really at it from the start. Yeah.
So was it a surprising appointment for Lewis Hamilton to go in there? So it's a bit of a risk, isn't it, if you bring in a genuine young hotshot?
Yeah, I think it was a bit of a surprise, but there's been a long history of having the established number one and the young number two who learn the ropes and come up through, promising driver, let's see what he can do. But we don't need to worry too much about his performance because, of course, Alonso was going to win the championship, isn't he? He's already the 2-time world champion. He's probably in the best car. The sort of McLaren Ferrari, as it became known as the sort of Spygate the details came out. But yeah, I think it was a risk, but it's not as if they were putting 2 young drivers in or 2 non-established drivers. They still had Alonso, who was at the time considered to be the best driver in the field.
Yeah, he definitely was. And I think we've sort of got used to Uncle Fernando, haven't we? But that wasn't the same driver back in those days. He was a full-on lion who was heading off to go and beat everyone's records. So this was a phenomenal challenge ahead of Lewis Hamilton. And it kind of echoes a little bit the George Russell situation as well. And I think, did it start off reasonably respectfully? I think Lewis Hamilton went in there racing hard, but one of the things I remember at the time was sort of, it was within the first few races going, oh, No, this is legitimate.
Yeah, so you wouldn't expect a rookie to come in and do particularly well first race at Australia, but and as you'd expect, Alonso qualified second, I think it was. Hamilton qualified fourth, so pretty respectable, but not setting the world on fire. But at the first corner, Hamilton went around the outside of Alonso and Kubica and into second place. Now, that was pretty impressive and got everyone's attention. But as the race went on, the true order was established. Alonso was faster. He got back in front, and Hamilton finished some distance behind. And that was the pattern really for the first few races. It wasn't until we got to Canada where Hamilton actually had his first win. Alonso had already won a race by then and was doing a bit better in the championship. But there's another clue. There's probably a mistake in there as well, or 3 or 4 mistakes. But yeah, it was harmonious enough. I suppose Monaco was the first flashpoint. They got to Monaco and Alonso won, Hamilton was second, and that seems pretty straightforward. That's fine, as it should be. But it was the way it played out. So Hamilton was all over the gearbox of Alonso for sections of that race, was frustrated that although team orders were officially banned, that he wasn't allowed to have a fair crack at Alonso and try and overtake.
I don't remember this at all. How did they stop him?
I don't know if at that point, I don't think the team radio was broadcast in the way it is now, so they probably just told him not to. But Hamilton was careful in his words afterwards. When he was interviewed by Andrew Benson for the BBC, he said that he wanted to attack. He felt he had the pace to win, but then he didn't say, I was told to slow down and hold position. What he said was, I have to respect that I'm a rookie, he's a world champion, and he's got number 1 in the car, I've got number 2, and I have to be patient. So I think that was a clue as to how good Hamilton might become when, I know you hate Monaco spanners, and a lot of us do, but it's traditionally seen as a benchmark for the real hot drivers. If you can push a lap around Monaco and not put it in the barriers, you're pretty special. And that was the first hint, I think, that he could become something special.
So George Russell has made some comments in the week. In fact, it was before the Imola Grand Prix where he made these comments like, I'm not going to come in here and start throwing my weight around with a 7-time world champion. It's not my job to start demanding things, very much playing that kind of respectful role. So I do wonder in that PR, in that situation, is he responding to what he's been told by the team, or is he playing a coy game? But it's interesting now to think to Lewis Hamilton playing that exact same game. Because if you start kicking off in that situation as Lewis Hamilton and saying, how dare you, and start throwing your helmet around, punching holes in the wall, Ricardo style, they'll just go, well, we'll just bring in the next rookie off the block, mate.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting when you think of what Hamilton became and how he was a bit more coy then. I don't think he believed a word of it in terms of I've got to be respectful and sit behind him, because it was only another couple of races later where Hamilton was winning and winning, not comfortably, but beating Alonso on pace. So he never had any intention of sitting tight and sitting behind him. He was out there to get out of the blocks fast, prove his worth in F1, and he feared no one at that time. But yeah, the echo. Russell's had some PR training obviously since Imola 2021, when that didn't famously go particularly well for him. Someone needed to drag him out of that pen and have a word with him before he kept saying.
This was when he clashed with Valtteri Bottas. And basically, with Bottas still sat in the car, went up to him and gave him like a proper telling off, and then kicked off a little bit in the pen in a very polite sort of George Russell way.
Yeah, fairly polite, but a bit of damage done there. But I mean, you'll see if we get on to Hungary and when things really go wrong for them. We can go there. So yeah, Hamilton had his first win in Canada. Alonso had a disaster, finished 7th. USA, Hamilton wins again. Alonso 2nd. But at the USA in Indianapolis, Alonso crossed the line, swerved towards his own team that were gathered on the wall, and shook his fist like, "Why I oughta."
Really? Like aggressively, like bad?
Yeah,
why?
Aggressively shook it. Well, he finished 2nd behind Hamilton, and I think Alonso's expectations were slightly different coming into the team, that he would be given proper number 1 status, and it was becoming clear that maybe that wasn't the case, and Uncle Ron might have had a new favourite.
Oh, do you think the tide was already starting to shift by then?
Yeah, it looks like it. I mean, maybe Dennis was giving them both a fair crack at the whip, but Alonso didn't necessarily want both of them to have a fair crack at the whip. He wanted, to win with one hand behind Hamilton's back, effectively. So, yeah, I think that's where the team dynamics started to break down, and there might be a few criticisms of the way that Ron Dennis managed the two young stags in a field, if you like.
I love this. This is like you mentioned, the Ferrari Leclerc thing, where Vettel was the ordained one. He was 4-time world champion. He was Mr. Ferrari at that time. He was the chosen next one after Alonso. And then you saw this change mid-season. And it's little subtle things like when they were coming together. Did they come out fully in support of Vettel? No, not really. Was Vettel losing his cool a little bit? I can't remember which way round it was. I think it was Vettel drifting into Leclerc at Brazil, at Interlagos, which really made you go, what is going on? And you think, have they fallen out of love with Sebastian Vettel? And sorry, Uncle Joe Sayward, told me I was bonkers when I said they might have fallen out of love with Vettel. And then, of course, they announced that they were letting him go. So these things do tip. And they do change. Look at Red Bull 2022 with Perez is resurgent. No, okay, that's a bit premature. But it does happen. Kings fall.
Yeah, and actually we'll come on to Hungary next. What happened in Hungary was so extraordinary and so catastrophic for Alonso that you might say that this one moment of madness and frustration is what set in motion a series of events which would result in Alonso never fulfilling his full potential and still being stuck at 55 or whatever he is now on 2 world championships. Because
wait, you're going to say that everything is going to stem from here, from this moment?
This is it.
Ferrari, the McLaren fake podium with Jenson Button, GP2 engine, everything starts here in the Hungaroring in 2007.
In the pit lane, not even on the track.
Tell us what happened. As if I didn't see it.
Well, let me set the scene. We're in Hungary. It's a mild day.
The number 47 bus is going.
Yeah. So we're in the final phase of or going into Q3 effectively. And if you remember back, they had the fascinating fuel burning section of phase of qualifying, which was just bewilderingly bonkers.
Yeah.
So during that phase, the team had ordered Hamilton to sit behind Alonso, give Alonso track position. Hamilton didn't do that. He had other ideas. So Hamilton struck first, if you like, in the battle, or what would become the sort of tension between them. Hamilton didn't give him track position. Alonso thought, I think, that he would teach him a bit of a lesson. So when they came into the pits for their final pit stop before the final run in Q3, Alonso was in front. Hamilton, they were double stacked effectively. Hamilton was sitting in behind. The lollipop came up, and Alonso didn't move, and he sat there for what was an inordinate amount of time. I think anyone who watched it live must have had to have their buttocks surgically unclenched at the end of it. It was so uncomfortable to watch. And he sat there counting in his head how many seconds he could hold up Hamilton and still get out for his lap. And that's exactly what happened. Alonso crossed the line with a second or so to spare, got his lap time in, and Hamilton was too late by the time they got his new tyres on and got out. Now, that didn't play particularly well in the team, and I think it blew up to such an extent that even Alonso was surprised. But then he made another catastrophic mistake. I mean, the first one was bad enough, but you might say, everyone gets frustrated. It's fine. Hamilton.
That's your teammate. That's your teammate, though. That's half of the guys in the garage. You've screwed over their qualifying session.
Yeah, it's not ideal. Recollections may differ about it, but it's not ideal. But what happened next was really what set Alonso's decline into motion, because on the Sunday morning of the race, Ron Dennis had a massive argument, we understand, with Alonso. Now, during that argument, things got a little bit more heated than they should have done, and Ron Dennis was never famous for his diplomacy, probably didn't handle it particularly tactfully, but I think he was right to be angry. But what Alonso did next was extraordinary. So nothing to do with the racing, nothing to do with the track. He brought politics large into the argument. McLaren were already suspects in this Spygate affair, and it was alleged that McLaren did have a dossier of technical information from Maranello, from the Ferrari. Now, what Alonso said to Dennis was, I've got emails that prove that you're implicated in this, and McLaren are implicated in this Spygate, and you're guilty of it, and I'm going to go to the FIA with them.
He allegedly said this, alleged conversation.
Alleged conversation, according to the BBC's reporter at the time, Andrew Benson.
Okay, in that case, we can just say it was reported, and then
it was reported that this is what happened. So what did happen next, it was reported, is that Dennis got freaked out that Alonso was going to roll the grenade in. So he got the preemptive strike in first. Ron Dennis phoned Max Mosley, the head of the FIA, and confessed that this is what had happened with Alonso.
Wow.
So he basically shot himself in the face effectively.
He just went,
for the
"Oh yeah, you think you can shoot me? Yeah, well, I'm going to shoot myself. That'll show you."
You can't fire me, I quit. Yeah. So that was not a great move either. I mean, Alonso, who knows if Alonso would have carried on through with the threat? You'd have to think probably not. If he was given assurances about what might happen in the future and parity or number one status, whatever it took to stop that threat being fulfilled is what should have happened. Not, I'll phone the FIA and dog myself in. So anyway, as a result of that, McLaren's season went pretty badly. They were disqualified from the Constructors' Championship coming into Spa that weekend. They were fined $100 million, which, I'm old enough to remember when $100 million was quite a lot of money. That obviously had an impact on development for the car and everything else. But the Drivers' Championship was still up for grabs, and you'd have to think, well, of course Ron Dennis must have fired Alonso on the spot for something as insubordinate as that. But no, he didn't. He was asked about it afterwards, and he gave a really bizarre answer. He said, who has not, in the heat of the moment, in an argument with his wife, said something that they regret? Which,
no comment.
It offers more questions than answers, really, about Dennis's relationship with his own wife, let alone with Alonso. Very, very, very strange thing to say. But anyway, Alonso stayed in the car. Pedro de la Rosa was passed over again and again and again. Didn't get the
too handsome to sit in a Formula One car, quite frankly.
He was blessed in other ways. Yeah. But the rest of the season was sort of ebb and flow between Hamilton and Alonso. The next three races, Alonso did really well. He outperformed Hamilton at Turkey, Italy, Belgium, and then we get to Japan. So we've got, I think, 3 races left: Japan, China, and Brazil. Japan, Alonso crashes out in the rain. Hamilton wins, and then it's advantage Hamilton. 2 races to go. And it's all on Hamilton. He's the bookie's favourite.
Now, you said to me pre-show it was a 17-point lead, but what was the point system back then?
Yeah, 10 for a win.
10 for a win.
Yeah, so he's got 12 points over Alonso and 17 over Raikkonen. So Raikkonen's effectively out, isn't he, at this stage? You have to think.
I remember. I can't believe Raikkonen ended up winning this championship. Oh, my God. It's painful when we relive these things. Because we, as fans, live in the moment so much on these seasons. You talk about them again, and it just all comes rushing back. I know we'll be doing this in 2035, and you'll be talking about Abu Dhabi 2021. And I'll be going, shut up, Jeff! It's too soon, Jeff! But yeah,
he was robbed.
The next couple of races are quite traumatic.
Yeah, so I don't mean to make this any worse for you, but all Hamilton had to do to win the title with a race to spare was to finish within 1 point of Alonso and within 6 of Raikkonen, and that's it. But what happened is the team kept him out on dry tyres longer than they should have done. The rain came down. And of course, the track dried, but the pit lane didn't, did it? Because the pit lane. Now he did learn from that mistake. We saw in another race recently where he didn't make the same mistake twice, but as he came into the pit lane on well-worn, they were grooved slick tires at that time, I think.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'll go with that.
The grooves had gone. Off he goes into the wall, and that's it. He's out of the race. And then we're into Brazil. Alonso finished P2 in that race, so he closed the gap to 4 points going into the final race. So we get to Brazil. Hamilton's on 107, still pretty comfortable. Alonso's on 103. Yeah, that's pretty good. Raikkonen's on 100. So Raikkonen...
He's out of it. He's nowhere.
He can't win it. He's not going to win it. He can't. It's impossible. The race didn't exactly pan out as we might have hoped, or at least Hamfosi hoped. Hamilton had gearbox trouble, only finished 7th. That was probably one of those Maranello parts that Dennis had nicked from Ferrari that failed. Alonso finished 3rd, but Raikkonen won it with the result that he was the unexpected champion by just 1 point. And Hamilton and Alonso finished 1 point behind on equal points, if you like. So it was for McLaren, it wasn't a brilliant season, not one to remember for the right reasons. And And of course, Alonso was binned after that. He had to go to Ferrari and not win the championship there either. But while Hamilton went on to do great things.
It's a great lesson, isn't it? That Raikkonen championship of just sticking with it, just keep plugging away and just doing what you're doing, because you don't know what's going to happen down the road. But we know we talk about Ferrari throwing things away. Well, they Ferrari'd again. But my goodness, like that was a disastrous season. All of their own doing, all completely unnecessary.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can blame the drivers if you like, and certainly blame Hamilton and Alonso for what happened in Hungary, but it's really the team management that has to take responsibility for the failure. I mean, this sounds a bit like The Apprentice, doesn't it? Who was responsible for the failure of this task? It's Ron Dennis, because he failed to manage them. You put two drivers out and you tell them different things and say, "Oh, don't worry, mate, you're number one."
Well, hang on. Sorry, I've got to interrupt you. We've got a bumper for this. You see,
Whose fault is it?
it's the ultimate. Whose fault is it? Who lost them? How many did you say? £100 million,
$100 million,
and cost them both championships, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, we can't apportion blame 60-40, can we? Because someone has to be to blame.
Someone has to be to blame.
Yeah. Alonso made the threat. Dennis showed terrible management skills, not for the first time in his career, by not diffusing the situation. Instead, he went and blew it up completely in a way that was unnecessary. So it has to be Ron Dennis for failure to control his drivers, being a little bit duplicitous behind the scenes in terms of who had number one status, who didn't, whether there was parity, whether actually he was favouring Hamilton, which I think Alonso felt at the time, and then not dealing with two drivers that had collided and collapsed, and there were expectations weren't managed there.
I have a question, Misa at the back. So the conspiracy theory, of course, is that not only were they thrown out of the Constructors' Championship, but they were told not to win the Drivers' Championship, and then no further action would happen of this Spygate.
Yeah, that's clearly nonsense, isn't it? Because you don't get £100 million fine and get off lightly. And the Constructors, of course, being thrown out of the Constructors was another financial penalty on top of that, wasn't it? Because that's where the real money is for the teams. It's not in the Drivers' Championship. That's for glory, as we know. I don't believe a word of that. When it comes to the FIA, Ferrari, Ferrari International Assistance, there was an element of that probably to some extent during the Schumacher dominance, but I don't think that was at play here. Ferrari had a really good car. I mean, they were winning races right from the start. They won in Australia. I think Raikkonen might have won 5 races during that season. Alonso and Hamilton won 4 each. Massa won 1, I think. So it was a good car. It was competitive the whole way through, but they certainly, I don't think things were orchestrated in the final race in that way. And I think given the mood that Alonso was in, he'd probably have told us about it by now if that was the case.
I'm sure. And it's such a big defeat, because if you look at, obviously Hamilton's career, 7 world titles, Alonso never really challenged again. And in fact, it was a series of really disastrous moves. He told us how much he outdrove that Ferrari, but it was never in title contention. 2012, it was in title contention. But the challenge really did sort of slip, and that they Ferrari'd 2012.
That was another. Whose fault is it? Definitely the team's fault, I think. On that one, they made a 1,000-yard stare at the end when he couldn't believe he hadn't won it. But he shouldn't have been there. He should have been in a McLaren and doing well at there. There could have been imagine that as a teammate partnership if that had lasted 5 or 6 years. We'd never have seen the heights of Heikki Kovalainen and the wonderful things that he achieved during his time at McLaren. He fair to middling, but he didn't deserve to be in that seat. It shows you how disruptive that 2007 season was whenever they were willing to put Heikki Kovalainen in that car.
And then ending up, obviously, in the disastrous McLaren, eventually coming back and basically what we thought was wasting probably the prime of his later career, and then obviously now coming back with Alpine, where, as we know, because he's told us, he's driven some of the best races of his career. And I know I hadn't quite put together the butterfly effect from possibly one race. Like I said, they might have been giving them both a fair whack of it, but then you fall out with your boss, and all of a sudden this kid that's come in, that's been very respectful, that said, well, I'm the number 2, I'll do what you need me to do, I'm a team player, and is getting results, and didn't threaten to get you kicked out of the championship with illegal documents. yeah, you might start to look at Lewis Hamilton and go, yeah, you're fine. Go on, in you go.
Yeah,
in you go.
Yeah, you can hang around for a bit longer. Yeah, it's. I mean, I'm sure that in the "What did Jeff get wrong" section, we'll have people point to a number of other catastrophic decisions that
That's
Alonso
good.
made.
That's part of it. It's a feature, not a bug. Jeff deliberately gets at least 15 things wrong per segment, so that we can hear from you. Obviously, you can comment in the YouTube, but if you're a podcast listener, we love hearing from you. Feedback at missedapex.net. Me and Matt are going to do a mailbag episode on Tuesday, so make sure you get those questions in. Feedback at missedapex.net, or you can do Matt and or Spanners at missedapex.net as well. Jeff, can people follow you on social media?
Yeah, join the other 98 people that have committed, along with the bots. Like half of them are bots. It's Jeff O'Boyle 1 at Twitter, whatever that's called, elonmusk.com.
Have you only got 98 followers?
Well, I had a lot more, and then I got locked out of my old account, didn't I? And I couldn't reset the password because I'm technically inept.
It's just that I've got 10.3 thousand. So if it was a competition, I'm just saying I've got 10.3 thousand. I can't stop saying that at the moment, to be honest.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Jeff O'Boyle. Come back soon with another historic teammate battle. Well, that's all we've got time for this week. Bear in mind that these segments have been recorded on Tuesday the 26th and Thursday the 28th to be published on Sunday. So if anything inexplicable happens, like the Miami Grand Prix is cancelled and our whole Miami Grand Prix preview travelogue segment is out of date, all I can do is apologise and just imagine how good it would have been in context of a Miami Grand Prix. But everything being equal, hopefully this has landed in your podcatcher and on your YouTube well, and we'll see you on Tuesday. After that, we will be staying up late for a Miami Grand Prix race review. My tactic is to sleep on Sunday afternoon until the race, and I'll just be up as late as it takes to do the race review, and then I'll employ some Americans and Australians to come and join me for that as well. So it will be ready for your Monday morning commute, even if you're not staying up to watch it live. Until next time, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast.